Hey, thank you guys for joining. Really, really appreciate this.
Yeah, we're happy to be here.
So we all know how you all met. So let's go backwards a step, right? Let's start with you, Emily. Tell me about growing up in North Carolina.
I grew up in a very small town in North Carolina that my parents still live in, so I still get to go home to how I grew up. Very, very rural, very pretty homogenous, but not really pockets of lovely, pockets of absolute lovely. I have great friends. I have a lovely family there. And everybody I know that I grew up with there that's still there has made a very interesting and kind of impactful life for themselves there, which is really, really lovely. But it was somewhat sheltered and a very small town.
Yeah. And what got you out of said small town?
Needing to. I felt I definitely had a sense, and I started getting the internet was in its like bulletin board stage, BBS prodigy phase when I was in high school, and I just had a sense of I feel too weird for this town. I feel like I don't fit here. There has to be somewhere where I make more sense, and I'm not the weird one. I will also say I was very consciously like trying hard to be the weird one. Like dyed hair, piercings, all of that stuff. But I felt like I needed to see what else was available for me, what other options were there for me, because there just aren't a lot of, I come from a very practical family and there just weren't a lot of options.
All that said, I do want to stress, Emily has a massive amount of North Carolina pride.
Very much
Emily, she, knows every single slightly famous person that has ever visited.
We all hang out. If they're in Los Angeles, I'm all over them. It's true because I think I've seen really, really cool, progressive, weird, smart, amazing things come out of my home state. And I think when people think like, oh, the South is, is a certain way, that's not true in any sense of the word. And I needed to leave because I couldn't see the possibilities there, but that doesn't mean the possibilities weren't there, by the way.
Yeah, North Carolina is just it's an interesting state.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. So yeah, that's how I grew up.
So Kumail, Karachi, Pakistan to Grinnell, Iowa. That's a very, very standard path that millions have taken, but you're
Yeah, there's a flight that goes from Karachi to Grinnell. No stops.
What was that like? So tell me about Karachi first and then Grinnell.
Well, I mean, Karachi. Karachi is a massive, massive, massive city. I mean, it's 20 million people. That's twice the size of New York. It's Emily's very much like a country girl. I grew up in a city. I love cities, so I grew up there till I was 18. I assume you've been to Karachi, right?
I have.
Yeah, it's like a very, very alive, very, very vibrant. It's not a boring city at all. The food is amazing. It's just a lot of people, and it's sort of like a loud hustle and bustle kind of city. I really loved it. And so then going to Iowa was very different because Grinnell, Iowa, I don't think 20 million people have ever heard of Grinnell, Iowa.
They've never said the word Grinnell out loud.
They've never said the word Grinnell out loud. Karachi's like I said, full of traffic and buildings, and then you land in Iowa and it's just like open fields, So it was very, very, very different. I'd never been to a place like that at all. And in fact, I didn't really understand that places like that existed in America because I knew America from movies and TV shows, and there isn't a lot of stuff that's set in places like Iowa. So I was really kind of stunned. I thought it was all going to be like New York and LA, which is what I had seen. So it was very much a shock, a culture shock. But the people of it ended up being good because if I'd gone to New York, it might have been overwhelming. Although New York is similar to Karachi in many ways. in Iowa, it was enough room that I had like I could like breathe, and I had time to settle down and understand the people and the country. And for me, you know, people were really, really welcoming and curious about me and Pakistan. So going to Iowa, you know, it sounds weird, but I wouldn't change it. I would suggest it.
So both of you very much had kind of a formative experience in rural America.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, big time.
Oh yeah.
Big time. I mean, the only chain we had was when I got there, we had two chains. We had Subway and we had Taco John's. It's not even Taco Juan. And then later we got a McDonald's. And I don't know where we're at now over there, but yeah, it was very, very formative. I would say that's kind of where I felt like I became an adult.
Yeah. So then, when did you guys, when did the Little America idea come to you or start to take shape? Was it kind of before or after 2016, the election?
After.
After. So as I was watching it, there's just something about this set of stories that is just so incredibly unique. And like, as I was thinking about this conversation, I was really struggling to kind of put my finger on it. And the best description I have, and I'm kind of wondering if this is kind of what you all were aiming for and how you wrestled with this, but through this set of stories, you were able to talk about, you know, race and culture and being American in a way that, you know, just takes the viewer by surprise. So as you all were kind of putting this together, you know, what was your goal from the outset of kind of with this set of stories?
Firstly, we just wanted to make a really good TV show. We wanted it to be entertaining, and we wanted to, from the beginning, we were like, we want to have a show where it's an anthology. So we really wanted every episode to feel completely different. And we wanted to just really entertain people. And we wanted it to sort of be sort of everything that entertainment can be, which is we wanted some to be funny, we wanted it to be thrilling, we wanted it to be moving, we wanted it to be inspiring, we wanted it to be scary. And then we were also excited about telling the kinds of immigrant stories that you don't generally see in American pop culture. You know, generally in American pop culture, no matter what side of the immigration debate you're on, when you hear the word immigrant, most of America gets a certain image in their head, right? No matter what side of the debate you're on. And we wanted to show that when you think of the word immigrant, there should not be an image in your head because there really isn't like the, you know, ideal form of an immigrant or anything. Every immigrant has a completely different story. So we wanted to show that too. We wanted to show that immigrants have all kinds of experiences in America. It's not just the usual sort of really, really stories of struggle and strife. And I think those stories definitely have place, you know, those stories are very valuable, but we wanted to show different stories.
And I think Lee Eisenberg approached us with the idea, and it was the first thing after the Big Sick that Kumail and I were like, we'd been approached about quite a few things. It was the first thing that we were like, we have to do this, namely because I wanted to watch this. And I think that thing you're talking about of the tone comes from the fact that these are all inspired by real stories, and real people's stories are like that. Real people's stories feel real. And there's so many times that we, as we were kind of developing these stories, it was so much where our instincts were like, and then that was the part that changed everything. Well, that's not how life works. Life doesn't change. There's never one event. There's one episode about the hotel manager where the young man gets an audience with First Lady Laura Bush to plead for his parents' immigration status to change as they've been kind of deported. And that should have been the moment that changed everything. Didn't do anything. That's what life is. And so I think having such a lovely idea that like, we don't need to make these stories up. They already exist. And I think that really, really kind of has been something we tried to work with as we've been developing the second season. It's been like our kind of guiding light.
And as you were putting them together, who are you thinking of in terms of the audience? I know, like, obviously your audience is much bigger than kind of one person, right? But were you thinking of kind of like the native-born American, you know, the person in rural North Carolina to kind of think about immigrants differently? Or are you thinking about the immigrant community to see themselves differently? Or both?
We wanted the Yeah, both. We wanted everyone. I mean, that was something we actively and explicitly talked about. We wanted this show to be accessible to everybody. We did want, so if there's an episode with someone from Nigeria, we wanted it to be so authentic that someone from Nigeria could watch and go, wow, they really nailed it. They got it all right. That's what I eat. That's how these words are pronounced. So to us, it was very important that every episode be completely specific and authentic and also accessible to everyone. And the show's on Apple TV, and that was a big priority for Apple as well. I mean, everybody in the world, not everybody in the world, but a lot of people have Apple devices. So they wanted this to have a global audience. And that's what was surprising to me in a really good way. I assumed that because the show is about people moving to America, that the audience would be American. We've heard, we've never done anything that has had such a positive global response. We hear from people all over the world saying they're watching this show. So
a lot of translating
me,
of tweets. There's a lot of translating.
Exactly. You're like, wait, what did they say? And then you put it into Google Translate. You're like, okay, good. They liked it.
They liked it. But I do think, I think if you set out to make something where like, I'm going to show people, this is how they should think about this group of people. I think people can tell. It's not that good art can't be made that way, but I do feel like, I think the goal should be to tell a story and to like kind of further that human connection. And I always think of, I was a therapist for years, and we would always talk about like, how do you build rapport with a client that's nothing like you? And it's like, I haven't been through your experience. I don't have I don't come with the baggage that you've come with. I don't come with the weaknesses and strengths that you've come with. But what I have felt is heartbreak. I felt sad. I felt lonely. I felt angry. And I think if we can connect those
and
emotions,
positive emotions as well.
there are positive emotions too. Those people aren't coming into my office.
I'm too happy. I'm too satisfied.
But you don't know what that person's been through. You can't know what that person's been through. You can't understand how things are stacked against them. What you can possibly connect to is that emotion that they are left feeling because of all of that. Everyone has felt every type of emotion. And so I tried to keep that in mind as we were developing the show too, is that as long as we can keep those emotions as being like the baseline of what people can connect to, they can be told a story. Otherwise, it gives them a glimpse into someone that they feel familiar with or don't at all feel familiar with.
So good.
No, I was just going to say that ultimately what it shows is we all have much more in common than we don't. I think it can be very easy to say that people who don't look or sound like you, that they're a different species almost. That's not true. We all want the same thing. We all as humans have so much more in common than
That's not to say that we're all the same and that we don't have radically, systematically different challenges. But how we are alike is as Kumail is saying, is that we are alike in the things that we want as a basic human need and a human right. I think that stuff is super important to be reminded of.
So, obviously I work in immigration advocacy, right? So you'd think that I've watched like every single immigration movie out there or read every immigration book. And reality is I don't watch that many because, they drive me crazy, but also because they're often very preachy, right? And this wasn't preachy. Right. So therefore, I found it to be something that persuaded both somebody who has questions about immigrants, but also somebody who is coming from the community. So the question I have for you is, how do we use persuasive stories to then mobilize somebody to actually take a different sort of action?
Wow. I think you just have to trust the audience. You really do. As you said, a lot of this stuff can feel preachy. We didn't want the show to be like medicine television. We didn't want it to feel like you do this and then you're going to have like a call to action. I think the hope with art, with all of the work we do at least, is you just have to hope that it's communicating your point of view and that it's convincing people or making people see something differently. And then you kind of just have to trust that people will take the actions that they will take. I think if in a TV show you say you have to do this, that'll turn people off. I think what you have to do is just show these stories, hope people's minds are opened a little bit, and then hope that they act on that.
Mhm.
I think that's the best we can do. What do you think, Emily?
Yeah, I think, I mean, again, it goes back to, I grew up not having a wide diversity of human beings around me in North Carolina. And I think if you don't have people in your immediate vision that are different from you, it can be very easy to kind of other them. And so if you don't have those people in your immediate view, the next best step is like, here's some art, here's some, well, lofty, here's some TV, here's some movies that depict people who are not like you. And look, they are kind of like you. They burn dinner. That's actually a thing that when I realized I really bonded with Kumail's family is when the smoke alarm went off when your mom was making dinner that time. And I was like, this happens in my parents' house all the time. What a great thing. We everyone burns food when they're making dinner. And I think if you don't have that opportunity in your personal life, which everyone should seek that out, everyone should try to surround themselves with different types of people, then I think that's a great form that art can take. And I think, as Kumail has mentioned on a thing before, that's a thing that, and people are like, oh, I don't want to watch stories about people that aren't like, I don't connect. As Kumail said in a speech he gave, I think at the Oscars, he's been watching and connecting to stories of white men his whole life. It's absolutely possible. It's absolutely possible. And so I think, I think that's just showing people as humans and not, oh my gosh, look, they're perfect. And oh my gosh, these are bad guys. Like, just showing humans in their full capacity and letting people enjoy that. I think I've mentioned this on another thing, but my dad, who is in his 70s, North Carolinian amateur beekeeper, watched Moonlight and he said, I came away with it kind of understanding romantic love between two men in a way that I hadn't dawned on me before. And I thought, what a lovely thing. Like, and that's just from watching a movie. Like, yeah. I don't think there's anything terrible about kind of opening your empathy horizons from watching TV and movies.
So is this a harder thing to do, or is it easier kind of in this political environment?
Oh, wow. Good question. I think it's more necessary to do, I think it's, as Emily was saying, if you're not surrounded by people from all over the world, it can be very easy to other them or demonize them.
So sorry, our doorbell's ringing. It's just going to happen for a second. I don't know if you can hear it.
And now I feel like we're more polarized than ever before. I feel like people who disagree with each other are talking to each other less than ever before. We're all just sort of screaming at each other. And I think right now, is it harder or easier? I think it's more necessary. I don't think it's easier in the sense that there are more like outlets and channels. So there's just more TV shows you can make. Like, I don't think we could have made Little America 5 years ago. We certainly
absolutely not.
We could not have made it 10 years ago. So the reason we were able to make it is because there were, Apple was starting a new streaming service and they were like, oh, we want to have a show that sort of feels global.
Also true, not a lot of, we pitched the show around, a lot of places didn't want it. A lot of places did not think it was a good investment. So it's still an issue. Yeah.
It's still difficult. It's easier than it's been before, but it's still pretty hard to make something like that. The challenge, Ali, I think, is how do you get people to watch a show that they are not inclined to watch? That's the challenge, If you, the people that I would want to see Little America most, I honestly don't know if they're going to give it a shot. And how do you make that happen? I don't know. I mean, that's, because everybody's
quite a bit.
Yeah, everybody's, media intake is so curated and personalized now. You can really stay in your own little bubble and just watch the stuff that doesn't challenge you or change your point of view in any way. So that's the challenge. How do you get it to people who you think could um, could could benefit from it in some way, who would perhaps empathize, like as you said, Emily, about your dad for the first time understanding romantic love between two men. How do you do it so that someone might for the first time understand why an immigrant would want to come in America to make a better life for themselves?
And should be said, the reason my dad watched Moonlight is because I let him borrow a screener. I don't know that he would have thought it out otherwise.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's part of it too. Yeah.
Yeah. So we do a lot of work. I mean, 90% of our work in the advocacy space for us at the forum is engaging conservatives and moderates. And what we found is that, for example, it's the faith media, the religious media, that's the most conducive path to those communities. So rural North Carolina, for example, it's all about, the evangelical web platforms, pastors and others. So, I guess the question, as you all are rolling it out, and as you're thinking about season 2, how are you going to grapple with these questions that are kind of tearing the country apart in many ways, around faith and kind of religious identity? And because that's just a prism through which people see immigrants, and at least in our case, people are asking a lot of questions, which are really thoughtful questions about immigrants and immigration, but through their respective faith prism.
Yeah, I don't. It's also interesting. We wrote this season, we really we did not want any of the episodes to really feel like they were tackling like specifically current issues right now. We wanted them to sort of feel timeless in a way. So you're asking, how do we get the show to relate to people who are looking at it through different religious point of view, right? I think, yes, Emily?
Do you want to go, or do you want?
Go for it.
I think one thing we talked about for season 2 was this idea of community, and that we really talked a lot of the first season episodes are about people kind of coming here and acclimating. We wanted to focus in the second season on people finding a community for themselves in America. And that's what a lot of these scripts, which we haven't been able to make because of COVID, deal with. And I do think that sense of community is something that I grew up with in the church that I grew up in. That was the most important thing, was that it provided community. It provided a safe, in a world where you kind of don't have to be as in communication with people around you, finding a community of people that you feel like have similar values to you, I do think is something that we are kind of tackling in the second season. It's not always through a religious prism, but that idea of community to me is the most important thing, and in having faith, and in what that kind of means. And so yeah, it is something that we are kind of working on, not in a specific, like, do you come here and find a new religion? Do you come here and abandon religion? As much as like what that community means for you and what it does for you.
I will also say, if for instance, if you're talking about someone, I also think all of the religions are more, as I said about people, I think it's very similar to religions as well. I think all religions are more similar than they are not. Like Muslims and Jews traditionally have sort of had a lot of animosity. If you look at those two religions, they are remarkably similar, right? I mean, the rules for kosher and halal are like almost exactly the same, yet here we are focusing on what are ultimately tiny differences instead of focusing on the massive overlaps that we all have. So I think, if someone's evangelical watching the show and seeing someone of another religion, I think that they'll understand what most religions teach. It's sort of all the same thing. And it's like Emily's saying, the importance of community. Yeah. All religions are against murder. They're all against stealing, I mean, I think all religions tap into the same like trough of morality that is important to human society.
Mm-hmm. But you're right. It's kind of that everybody defines their community in a different way. And for folks, I think, who are struggling most with this, they often define their community through their church or through their religion. So, for you, Emily, like are you still in touch with folks back home in rural North Carolina?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how do they take the show?
Wonderfully. I think maybe a lot of people watched it because of my involvement that maybe wouldn't have watched it before. So we got those numbers going for it. I think a question I got quite a bit from my cousins was, are those really, does that really happen? Are those real stories? And I think that was a kind of a lovely thing to kind of engage in them with conversations of like, yeah, these were all real people and we took their stories and we kind of dramatized them and here's how you have to change things for TV. But these are all experiences that people have gone through. And that it was interesting to me that was the question I got the most. Are these real? Are these actually really real people? I think,
yeah, because the stories seem so specific and they're so different from traditional immigrant narrative that most people here are exposed to, including your family in North Carolina. It feels, in a way, because they're real, they feel fake because what's fake feels real.
Right.
That's right.
So what do you think is missing when you look at kind of the immigration debate in the country at large? So kind of stepping away a little bit from the show and just kind of looking at the way the issue is playing out. What's missing?
What I think the ultimate thing is missing is humanity. I really do believe that the idea, I mean, immigrants are people who chose America as their home, right? Emily was born here. I chose to come here. I had to fight to come here. I had to prove that I belonged here. So in a way, I wanted to be in America more than Emily did. Emily didn't choose it. I
didn't have to. Yeah, exactly.
The fact that I'm demonized for choosing America, for choosing America as my home, the fact that I'm demonized for that, it's not just inhumane. I find it extremely illogical. I feel like, immigrants come here, they give up everything in search of better lives for them and their families. They uproot everything. They start over just because in the pursuit of, liberty and happiness and food and love. And those are all American ideals. So to me, that's what's missing. I feel like what I hear is stats of, immigrant crimes and this kind of stuff. And I know that the crimes in the immigrant community are much lower than crimes committed by non-immigrants. But the idea that we're focusing so much on the negative, it's it's just heartbreaking to me. I feel like that's what's missing from it. I feel like I was talking to Emily about this, and this is a quote from somebody. I'm not going to do it justice, and I'm not going to remember the name either. But I feel like there's a sense that immigrants, all of the immigrants are defined by the actions of the tiny, tiny percentage of them that have done something bad. So we never focus on good immigrant stories. We only focus on immigrant stories when when a crime is committed or something. So I think there's a lot of perspective and humanity missing from the debate. It all gets reduced to numbers and statistics, and I don't understand.
I will say we also don't focus on the boring immigrant stories. It's like the idea of the exceptional immigrant, I think, is also kind of bonkers. You have every right to come here and can we curse?
Go for it.
Fuck around. You have every right to come here and fuck around and try to figure out. That's something we are Americans. It's like an American tradition to I'm not sure what I want to do. I got to figure myself out. It's the American dream. And just to come here and work in a restaurant and be dead happy, be the happiest. You don't have to have the good story or the bad story. You can have the boring story. And I'll say, as a person who witnessed, kind of was with Kumail as he was going through the immigration process, I think so many times I had that click of oh, I didn't get what this was like I remember we were at an appointment for one of your green card things and a guy took your passport and was like, I'll be right back. And you were panicking. And I was like, Kumail, it's okay. He's going to be right back. It's fine. But I had never thought about my passport has never meant that an American passport has never meant that much to me, it's been important because I'm an American and I want to travel, but it's never been a thing that's been connected to, oh, do I have a home? Am I going to be okay?
It's never been a symbol of anything.
Never really meant anything. And I think understanding from that perspective, how much is at stake. I think it did not, that had not occurred to me. Also, the fact that you're kind of reduced, you're just put into this machine. And one thing that all Americans have trouble with is that idea of like, I'm just in a machine, I'm not a person. Like, we all get frustrated at that. And I think maybe native born Americans don't realize that's what people are going through. This is what immigrants are going through, is that thing that you feel when you go to the grocery store and they don't call your number first, they skip to the next number and you're really upset about it. Imagine that times a billion, and it means a lot to where you're going to live. I don't think that people kind of, or maybe other people do, but that's something I didn't understand fully.
Yeah, I don't think the public understands kind of how complicated or tense going through the immigration system is.
I know there's this sense, I feel like people think that the gates are wide open. Everybody's just coming in here.
Or you just go to the library.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really, really hard to emigrate to America. It is not easy.
So there's one thing, like, I wonder, so in the midst of COVID, right, in the pandemic, I think there's an opportunity to make the case that immigrants are, and so let me just give you the example. We've done some message testing in North Carolina and Wisconsin. And we tested two sets of messages. One is data driven, right? 40% of food packers are immigrants, 17% of doctors. The liberals love those messages, right? They love them. Conservatives, they look at the number and say, you know what? I have my own statistic. I can quibble with that. But when you say immigrants are standing shoulder to shoulder with the native born to help the country respond and recover the COVID-19, in North Carolina, among conservatives, we saw a 25% bump up in support for immigrants. But that kind of gets to what you're saying. It's like the story that you're telling is more important, I think, than the data, right? Because you can quibble with data.
I think that's exactly right. And I think you can exactly what you said. I mean, I think we're like in an age where everybody has data to support whatever claims they want. It's those emotional, personalized stories that really have the power to affect people and open people's minds.
That visualizing of the shoulder to shoulder, that's kind of perfect. I can see that. There is a sense of, and this is a little similar, but I remember having a relative who was a little judgmental of a lesbian friend of mine until she helped him with his car. And then, that's got its own, there's some weirdness with that too, but of like being like, kind of just seeing a person in a slightly different light, of not realizing there's something to that that's kind of, that makes complete sense.
It just makes them a person from something that's just a statistic or a number or a set of attributes that you've read about online.
Yeah. So getting back to something you just said, Emily, about kind of the exceptional immigrant, right? So back in, I think in like 2014, we're crafting a campaign and we come up with this phrase line and tagline, and this draft was something like, immigrants, can get the skills and opportunities so they can prosper. And I share this line with somebody pretty senior at that time with the Southern Baptist Convention, who, we've just done a lot of work with in a lot of different ways. And he said, no, that's not it. It's about whether or not somebody can reach their fullest potential. It completely, and so, every time I use that language and kind of talk through that frame, they have the same response you just did. It's like, oh yeah. I mean, it resonates, but it's kind of if you use the right language, you don't fall into that trap of the exceptional immigrant.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I wonder if there's not a thing of, I think often people think there's only a certain number of spots of people that are allowed to succeed. And that I think for some people, not the people you were referring to, but I do think for some people, they think I can't let that person who is an immigrant succeed because that's taking away one of the spots that's supposed to go to me or to my kids or whatever it is, rather than when you talk about potential, that's anyone's individual opportunity to make something of themselves. I think this idea, and I think that's a big issue that we all have, is like this idea that like, oh, there's only 9 seats at the table. I guess you're screwed. I guess you can't do anything now. I think that's a really, really false idea that kind of keeps us at war with each other. Yeah.
But it's also the stories you told. Little America was about people reaching their potential,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that may be.
Is. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
And Kumail, your potential is to become the first South Asian Marvel superhero.
Yeah, well, it keeps getting delayed. It kind of feels like I'm just lying to people. It doesn't feel real at all. It was going to come out this November for very good reasons. It's been delayed, but I kind of feel like a bit of an imposter where I'm like, I told everyone this was happening, and now I hope it does.
You're like, well, show us some of the footage. You're like, well, I can't do that. They're very
I
secretive.
haven't seen it.
But I can do a lot of sit-ups.
Yeah,
I mean, you can lift a lot of weights.
So what's the story of Little America that you want to tell, like in 5, 10, 15 years?
Ooh.
I think one of the things that was exciting to us about Little America is that it is a show. There are so many fantastic stories. I mean, picking stories in season 1 and then picking stories in season 2 was very difficult because there are so many amazing stories, Season 1, we really, as Emily said, we wanted to focus on individuals and we wanted to focus on stories that would be optimistic and hopeful. We on purpose tried to stay away from any darkness or anything like that. I mean, there are obviously episodes where things get a little hairy, but we wanted to sort of project a certain warmth with the first season. With the second season, as Emily was saying, we want to focus on community, right? That's what we want to do. Like someone from Ethiopia comes here, and they aren't like here alone. They're like now part of an Ethiopian community that's been here for decades. So it's just exciting how many more stories there are to tell, and we want to sort of have maybe a thesis for every season. The first season we certainly did. The second season we certainly do. I don't know. Hopefully we get to keep doing it for years and exploring more of it, more experiences. There's a couple pretty experimental episodes that we were going to do in season 2 that we're not doing anymore. But I think we want to explore that, where we can actually go through generations of people. A true story based on, parent, then their kid, then their kid, all true stories. We've got some of those too, and that maybe would be a 2-parter or a 3-parter or something like that. That's the great thing about doing an anthology, is there are no rules. You can kind of do whatever you want to do.
We've also been discussing kind of exploring within indigenous communities within the United States,
Yes.
how that applies to being an immigrant, and what does that feel like, and what is that situation? So who knows? I just think we get more and more stories all the time, especially as people watch the show and are like, have I got a story for you? I like the idea that we'll just kind of keep covering every possible angle, and that the more comfortable people are with the show and the more comfortable people are with the concept, the more we can kind of do whatever we like, and have episodes that are entirely, we had one episode in season 1 that was entirely silent. And I like the idea of like continuing on, of like, let's have an episode that's entirely with no English spoken whatsoever. Let's have an episode where absolutely, like, let's just kind of keep playing with this format as much as we can. We just want to keep doing that. There's so many fun things you can do.
So, kind of given everything you've seen and everything you've done over your lives, are you guys, and again, in this political moment, are you optimistic about kind of